wake up with a plan. Today, you will finally speak up. Today, you will finally start. Today, you will finally become the person you keep imagining at night. But somewhere between intention and action, something invisible tightens around your chest. You hesitate. You scroll. You delay. You tell yourself, later. And you don't know why. Not fear, exactly. Not laziness. Not lack of motivation. It feels heavier than that. Quieter. More intimate. Like a voice that doesn't shout, it whispers. Who do you think you are? Don't expose yourself. Better stay small. Better stay safe. You don't hear it as shame, you hear it as being realistic. But what if your realism is just a socially acceptable form of self-rejection? What if the thing controlling your choices is not fear, but shame wearing a mask? Pause for a second. Think of the last time you didn't say what you truly felt. The last time you didn't apply for that opportunity. The last time you shrank yourself in a room full of people. Did you tell yourself it was strategy? Did you call it patience? Did you dress it up as humility? Or did something inside you quietly decide, I am not allowed to be fully seen? Here is the disturbing paradox. You don't sabotage yourself because you hate yourself. You sabotage yourself because you believe you deserve to stay hidden. Shame does not feel like pain. It feels like identity. It feels like, this is just how I am. I'm not like those confident people. I should know my place. And that is why it is so dangerous, because when fear attacks you, you fight it. When shame defines you, you become it. If fear is a prison, shame is the prison guard that convinces you not to escape. You don't notice it because shame is not dramatic. It doesn't scream. It doesn't panic. It just contracts you. It turns ambition into unrealistic expectations, desire into selfishness, expression into cringe, confidence into arrogance. And slowly, without trauma, without catastrophe, your life becomes smaller. Not because you failed, but because you never fully entered the arena.
Carl Jung once wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But what if what's directing your life is not fate, but a quiet belief that you are fundamentally defective, not broken, not evil, just not enough? So you perform, you adapt, you blend in, you become useful instead of truthful, you become polite instead of powerful, you become acceptable instead of authentic, and you mistake this shrinking for maturity. But ask yourself, why does being seen feel dangerous? Why does success feel uncomfortable? Why does joy feel suspicious? Why does confidence feel like you're doing something wrong? What kind of invisible law are you obeying? Don't be too loud. Don't be too proud. Don't be too much. Don't be too visible. Who taught you that? And more importantly, why are you still listening? Here is the great question you must face. Is your personality truly your nature, or is it the shape shame forced you into? Are you actually introverted, or just trained to disappear? Are you actually humble, or just afraid of standing out? Are you genuinely content, or just emotionally resigned? Shame does not chain your body, it chains your imagination. You don't even imagine yourself as free. And when freedom is unthinkable, prison feels normal. Internal reflection. What if the reason you feel stuck is not because you lack power, but because you learned to feel guilty for having it? This is not about guilt. This is not about embarrassment. This is not about awkward memories. This is about the hidden force that decides what kind of life you think you're allowed to live. And until you see it, you will keep calling self-sabotage personality, calling avoidance wisdom, calling fear realism. But once you see it, you can no longer unsee it. Because shame is not just an emotion, it is a lens, a filter, a silent architect of destiny. And in the next part, we're going to expose where this lens came from, psychologically, culturally, and spiritually. Because shame is not born inside you, it is installed. And anything that is installed can be removed.
You were not born ashamed. A child does not hide their laughter. A child does not apologize for wanting. A child does not calculate their worth before speaking. Shame is learned, which means it has a history, a lineage, a curriculum. And like any curriculum, it had teachers, parents, teachers, religious authorities, peers, institutions, culture itself. Every time you were told, "Don't act like that. What will people think? Be realistic. Know your limits. You're too sensitive. You're not like them," a quiet equation formed in your mind. Expression equals danger. Visibility equals risk. Desire equals punishment. So you adapted, not because you were weak, but because you were intelligent. Your nervous system learned a survival strategy, disappeared just enough to avoid rejection. This is not cowardice. This is conditioning. Carl Jung called this the formation of the persona, the social mask you wear to be accepted. But what he warned about was more subtle. The longer you wear the mask, the more you forget there is a face underneath. And beneath that mask grows the shadow, everything you were not allowed to be. Anger, confidence, ambition, sexuality, spiritual hunger, creative fire, all exiled, all buried, all still alive. So now you don't just fear rejection from others, you fear your own depths. Because what if what's inside you is too much? What if the reason you feel blocked is not because you lack potential, but because your potential was once punished? Psychology shows this clearly. When a child experiences emotional invalidation, being mocked, ignored, or shamed for natural impulses, the brain links self-expression with social pain. And social pain activates the same neural circuits as physical pain. Your brain doesn't distinguish between being hit and being humiliated, so it learns to avoid exposure. Not consciously, reflexively. This becomes people-pleasing, perfectionism, chronic self-doubt, emotional numbness, fake humility, quiet resentment. You don't feel shame as shame anymore. You feel it as, "I just don't feel ready. I need to be better first. I don't want attention. I don't want to be judged." But underneath all of it is the same message. If I show up as I am, I will lose love. Philosophy saw this long before neuroscience did. Nietzsche warned that societies often create morality not to liberate individuals, but to tame them, to turn wild vitality into obedient predictability. He called this slave morality, a value system that praises meekness over strength, conformity over truth, guilt over greatness, not because these are noble, but because they are controllable. And shame is the emotional glue that holds this morality together. Not through violence, through self-surveillance. You become your own prison guard. Now look deeper, spiritually. In the Vedic worldview, your true nature is Atman, limitless consciousness, not small, not broken, not unworthy, but Maya, illusion, convinces you that you are merely a role, a son, a failure, a success, a sinner, a nobody. The Bhagavad Gita describes this tragedy precisely. You identify with a mask and forget the self behind it. And shame is the emotional weapon of that forgetfulness. It says, you are what you did. You are what they said. You are what went wrong. But Vedanta says, you are not the story. You are the witness of the story. Yet shame collapses the witness into the narrative. You stop being consciousness and start being a verdict. Culturally, shame is efficient. It doesn't require chains, it requires standards. You are taught what success looks like, what respect looks like, what masculinity looks like, what spirituality looks like, what happiness looks like, and then compared against it. Not explicitly, subtly, through social media, through gossip, through hierarchy, through praise. So you internalize the judge, and once the judge lives inside you, society no longer has to control you. You do it for them. Internal reflection. When did you start seeing yourself through imagined eyes instead of your own? This is why shame is more powerful than fear. Fear says, that might hurt. Shame says, you are wrong. Fear is about danger. Shame is about identity. And humans will tolerate pain, but they will reshape their entire lives to avoid feeling defective. So you choose safe love instead of true love, small dreams instead of real ones, silence instead of honesty, comfort instead of meaning. Not because you're lazy, because you were trained to believe being fully yourself is socially unsafe. And here is the cruel irony. Shame pretends to protect you. It says, don't risk it, don't stand out, don't reach too high. But what it actually protects is the system that taught you to shrink. It protects the past. It protects other people's fears. It protects the image, not your soul. So now you live with an invisible conflict. Part of you wants expansion. Another part wants permission. Part of you wants truth. Another part wants approval. And this tension feels like anxiety, procrastination, self-sabotage, chronic dissatisfaction. Not because life is hard, because you are divided against yourself. In the next section, we will expose what this division is doing to your relationships, your ambition, and your sense of meaning. Because shame doesn't just make you quiet, it makes you complicit in your own shrinking. And the cost of that is higher than you think.
Shame does not ruin your life loudly. It does not arrive as tragedy. It does not announce itself as a villain. It arrives as preference. You prefer safety. You prefer privacy. You prefer not to bother people. You prefer to wait until you're ready. And slowly, your preferences become your prison. Because shame rarely says, don't live. It says, live smaller. Look at your relationships. You don't say what you need. You don't express what you feel. You don't ask for what you want. Not because you don't know, but because somewhere inside you, a belief whispers, needing is weakness, wanting is selfish, being seen is risky. So you perform instead of relate. You accommodate instead of connect. You manage impressions instead of sharing truth. And the result? Loneliness inside company. You can be surrounded by people and still feel invisible because you never brought your real self into the room. Internal reflection. How many times have you chosen harmony over honesty and called it maturity? Now look at your ambition. Shame does not kill desire, it poisons it. It turns goals into guilt. Who am I to want more? Others have it worse. I should be grateful. Gratitude becomes a muzzle. Humility becomes a cage. You don't aim high, you aim acceptable. So you pursue what will not offend, what will not expose, what will not risk failure publicly. And then you wonder why your life feels flat. Neuroscience explains part of this. The brain is a prediction machine. It avoids what it associates with pain. If your nervous system learned that visibility equals humiliation, then success itself begins to feel unsafe. So your brain does something clever and tragic. It sabotages your momentum before you can be seen. You miss deadlines, you lose interest, you suddenly doubt everything. Not because the goal was wrong, but because the cost of being visible feels too high. What if your procrastination is not laziness, but a fear of being witnessed? Cognitive biases quietly reinforce this. Negativity bias makes you remember the one time you were mocked more than the 10 times you were accepted. Confirmation bias makes you search for proof that you don't belong. Spotlight effect convinces you everyone is watching, when in reality, everyone is trapped in their own shame. So your mind builds a distorted map of reality. Danger is everywhere. Judgment is constant. Safety is in hiding. And over time, this becomes your worldview. Not consciously, subconsciously. You start designing your life around avoidance. Avoidance of conflict, attention, excellence, intimacy, leadership, spiritual depth. And what does avoidance create? A life with no enemies and no meaning. Culturally, this multiplies. Shame-based societies produce compliant workers, quiet citizens, anxious achievers, moral performers. People who follow rules but do not feel alive. People who look successful but feel fraudulent. People who preach virtue but fear authenticity. And because everyone is pretending, everyone thinks they are alone, which deepens the shame. A perfect loop. Even spirituality is not spared. Instead of liberation, shame turns it into self-surveillance. I must be pure. I must be calm. I must not feel anger. I must not desire. So your shadow grows stronger, because whatever is denied does not disappear. It goes underground, and from underground it controls you, through compulsions, through fantasies, through secret resentment, through quiet despair. Jung warned, what you deny, you become. So the more you deny your darkness, the more it directs your behavior unconsciously. You call it fate, you call it karma, you call it personality, but really, it is unintegrated shame writing your script. Here is the deepest consequence. Shame fractures your sense of self. You become who you are versus who you show, what you feel versus what you allow, what you want versus what you permit. This inner split feels like chronic tension, restlessness, quiet sadness, a sense of not quite living. Not depression, not crisis, just a low-grade exile from your own life. Internal reflection. Are you exhausted because life is hard, or because you are constantly editing yourself? And the tragedy is subtle. You don't experience this as oppression, you experience it as normal. You say, this is adulthood, this is responsibility, this is how it is. But what if that's not wisdom? What if that's domestication? What if you've mistaken emotional anesthesia for peace? In the next section, we're going to turn this upside down, not with motivation, not with confidence tricks, not with just be fearless slogans, but with a radical shift in how you understand shame itself. Because the problem is not that you feel shame, the problem is that you believe it. And there is a way to see it so clearly that it loses its power. Up until now, you have been treating shame as an enemy, something to overcome, something to silence, something to outgrow. But what if that approach is the trap? What if the very act of fighting shame is what keeps it in control? Because shame does not survive on darkness, it survives on belief. It does not need to be strong, it only needs to be believed. So here's the radical shift. Shame is not proof that something is wrong with you. Shame is proof that something in you wants to live. That sounds absurd at first, but think carefully. You only feel shame about things that matter to you. You don't feel shame about being meaningless. You feel shame about being seen, about desiring, about failing publicly, about standing out. Which means shame is not born from weakness, it is born from potential colliding with conditioning. What if the part of you that feels ashamed is the same part that wants to expand? Jung would say this is the moment of integration. You stop trying to amputate the shadow and start listening to it. Not obeying it, not worshiping it, but understanding it. Because the shadow does not hold evil, it holds disowned life. The ambition you were told was arrogance, the anger you were told was sin, the sexuality you were told was dirty, the confidence you were told was dangerous. So instead of asking, how do I get rid of shame, you ask a more dangerous question. What part of me did shame force into exile? This is not positive thinking. This is psychological archaeology. You dig beneath the symptom to find the suppressed instinct. And suddenly, your shame becomes a map, not of your flaws, but of your forbidden power. Look at history. Every major transformation came from someone who was willing to be seen as wrong. Socrates chose truth over reputation. Jesus chose conscience over conformity. Buddha chose awakening over status. Nietzsche chose isolation over obedience. Not because they were fearless, but because they decided that shame was not a valid judge of reality. They redefined what mattered. Not what will they think, but what is true. Not will I be accepted, but am I aligned? And alignment is stronger than approval. Vedic wisdom says something even more radical. You are not the doer. You are the field in which action arises. Which means shame cannot define you. It can only visit you. Like weather. You do not curse the sky for rain. You do not obey the clouds. You observe. This is the shift from identification to witnessing. Instead of I am ashamed, it becomes shame is appearing. Instead of I am defective, it becomes a memory of rejection is being activated. And the moment this happens, you step out of the courtroom and into the witness stand. Shame stops being a verdict and becomes data. Neuroscience supports this. When you label an emotion as an event instead of an identity, the prefrontal cortex re-engages. You move from reaction to reflection, which means power returns, not as bravado, as clarity. You stop asking, how do I avoid this feeling, and start asking, what is this feeling trying to protect? Because shame always protects something, not your future, but your past. It protects an old rejection, an old humiliation, an old rule, an old wound. It is the guardian of memory, not of truth. Internal reflection. Is your current life being designed by your present values or by your past injuries? This leads to a dangerous insight. If shame was learned, it can be unlearned, but not through rebellion, through reinterpretation. You don't break the rule, you see the rule's origin. You don't silence the voice, you ask who taught it to speak. And suddenly, shame loses its authority, because you realize it never came from reality, it came from context, a child's context, a culture's fear, a parent's limitation, a society's convenience, not from your essence. So the radical shift is this: you stop trying to become confident, you start becoming honest. You stop asking, "How do I appear?" and start asking, "What is actually happening inside me?" You don't perform courage, you practice contact. Contact with your fear, your desire, your anger, your longing, your intelligence, your wildness. And something strange happens. The more contact you make, the less power shame has, because shame thrives on disconnection and dissolves in awareness. This does not make you reckless, it makes you real. You may still feel afraid, but you are no longer governed by it. You may still feel exposed, but you are no longer defined by it. You begin to live from values instead of from wounds, from curiosity instead of concealment, from presence instead of performance. And this changes everything. How you speak, how you love, how you create, how you lead, how you pray, how you fail. Not because life becomes easy, but because life becomes yours. In the final section, we will arrive at the deepest truth, not about shame, but about identity. Because the ultimate liberation is not overcoming shame, it is realizing that shame was never talking about you. It was talking about a story you learned to believe. And once you see that, there is only one question left. Who are you without the verdict?
Here is the truth you've been circling around without knowing it. Shame only exists when you confuse your experience with your essence. It can only rule you if you believe it is speaking about who you are instead of about what once happened to you. Shame says, you are wrong, but reality says, something happened, and that difference is everything. Internal reflection. What if nothing is wrong with you and something was simply learned incorrectly? You were never ashamed of yourself. You were ashamed of a moment, a memory, a mistake, a reaction, a look on someone's face. But the mind turned that moment into an identity. One event became a verdict. One rejection became a rule. One humiliation became a personality. This is how trauma becomes character, not because the wound was big, but because it was believed. And once believed, it became the lens through which you saw yourself. Jung called this misidentification. You confuse the mask with the face, the story with the self, the wound with the soul. Vedanta calls it avidya, ignorance of your true nature. Both point to the same thing. You are not the content of your mind. You are the space in which it appears. Shame is not you. It is a weather pattern passing through consciousness. And the moment you stop saying, "I am ashamed," and start saying, "Shame is appearing," you reclaim authorship. You stop being the character. You become the narrator. Here is the most dangerous realization. There is no version of you that deserves to be hidden. Not the angry you, not the ambitious you, not the lustful you, not the afraid you, not the confused you. Those are not sins, they are energies. And what is not integrated will be acted out unconsciously. This is why repression does not make you virtuous, it makes you fragmented. But integration makes you whole, not perfect, whole. So the ultimate truth is not be confident, it is stop treating your humanity like a crime. Stop trying to be acceptable before you are truthful. Stop trying to be pure before you are present. Stop trying to be fearless before you are honest. Because honesty is the beginning of freedom, not performance, not positivity, not dominance, presence. And presence reveals something shocking.
Shame is not protecting you from rejection. It is protecting you from contact with your own intensity, your own longing, your own intelligence, your own depth. It is afraid that if you touch those, you will no longer live a borrowed life. You will no longer seek permission. You will no longer shrink for comfort. You will no longer mistake survival for destiny. Look closely at your life. Where are you still asking for permission to exist more fully? Where are you still apologizing for your size? Where are you still editing your truth? Where are you still negotiating with an invisible judge? Internal reflection. Is the voice that controls you actually real or just familiar? The ancient texts say liberation is not an achievement, it is a recognition. Not becoming something new, but remembering what you are. Not fixing yourself, but dropping the accusation. And the accusation was this: I am wrong for being. But existence itself never made that claim. Culture did, fear did, pain did, not reality. So what happens when you stop believing shame? Not when you suppress it, not when you fight it, but when you see through it. Something quiet changes. You still feel fear, but it no longer defines you. You still feel exposure, but it no longer imprisons you. You still feel doubt, but it no longer decides for you. You act not because you are fearless, but because you are aligned. You speak not because you are confident, but because you are congruent. You create not because you are approved, but because you are alive. And life lived from aliveness is stronger than life lived from safety. This is the final paradox. Shame wants to make you small so you won't be rejected. But only when you stop being small can you be real. And only what is real can connect. And only what connects can be loved. So shame, in trying to protect you from pain, protects you from love. There is no dramatic ending to this, no explosion, no anthem. Just a quiet question that will echo after this video ends. What would your life look like if shame was no longer the author of your choices? What would you say? What would you risk? What would you stop pretending? What would you finally begin? Not tomorrow, not when you are ready, but when you stop believing that being seen is a crime. Final reflection. You are not here to be correct. You are not here to be approved. You are not here to be harmless. You are here to be real. And the moment you choose reality over reputation, shame loses its throne. Not because you defeated it, but because you outgrew the story that needed it. And the most dangerous thing you can do is stop hiding from the life that has been waiting for you to show up.